Our next Conversations That Count, Politics Not as Usual, brings together seasoned Washington insiders who have navigated the White House and other venues of power and influence. Today, they'll share their insights on how Black women can thrive in an ever-changing and often challenging political landscape. Leading this highly anticipated discussion is a distinguished journalist and the anchor of CNN NewsNight. Please give a warm welcome to our moderator, Abby Phillip. Now it's time to welcome our incredible panelists, true experts in White House leadership. First, she served as White House press secretary and special advisor to the president during the Biden administration. Please welcome Karine Jean-Pierre. She is joined by a powerhouse leader who currently serves as Chief Executive Officer of the Barack Obama Foundation and is also this year's Barbara Graves Legacy Award honoree. Please welcome Valerie Jarrett.
Good morning. How is everybody doing today? Thank you for being here. So you know these two women so well. They need no introduction. I just want to say, I think one of the purposes of this conversation is to share the journey that both of you have been on. You've overlapped in certain kinds of experiences, so we'll talk about that. But I also, when I was preparing for this, I went deep into your bios, and I think that when you have so many things on your biographical list that people forget the things that you've done, right? And you know, Karine, you've worked for not just Joe Biden, but John Edwards, Barack Obama, Martin O'Malley, but you also made history as the first openly LGBTQ person to stand at that White House podium. You are an activist. You are an activist, you are a political leader, and you're about to enter into a new chapter, which we'll talk about. Valerie, if you were here last night, you heard so much about her incredible journey, but this is a woman who has traversed local and state politics to the C-suite. She was the CEO of the Habitat Company, which I have to say does not get a lot of mention in your bios because people focus a lot on the White House, but Valerie served as a CEO for many years before entering the White House and working as a senior advisor for President Obama, the longest serving person in that White House. So let's just jump right into it. When I was 21 years old, I walked into the White House for the first time as a reporter. I want to know from each of you about that day that you walked into the People's House for the very first time, and you had earned it at that point. You had done all of the work, and yet still, I know that that moment is significant. I wondered, Karine, tell us what it was like, and then just put your mind to, I guess, where you are right now. You just walked out. What has changed, if anything, about your perceptions from that day when you first walked in?
Oh, such a good question. Let me first say it is truly an honor to be sharing the stage with these two ladies. I have gotten to know Valerie Jarrett for a while now, and I don't know if we'll get into this, but about mentors, and she has been a mentor to me and so many of us. And I know when I got into the campaign in 2008, everybody, all of us young folks were like, we have to meet Valerie Jarrett, we have to meet Valerie Jarrett. And so I had a chance to meet her when we got into the White House, and she's always been there for me. She's always had my back. She would call me or text me and leave me messages and say, hey, I'm here if you need to talk. And I think that's really important for women like us who are trailblazers, are first, to have people before us who are saying, it's okay, I'm checking in on you. So Valerie Jarrett has been tremendous in my career, so thank you so much. And I also don't want to forget Abby, who is, it's incredible to watch her every night on a primetime show as a Black woman, doing her thing and being wicked smart, an excellent reporter. And so it is an honor to be on the stage with you as well. So I'm going to try and be really quick because I can be long-winded, so I'll try not to be too long-winded. So when I had two different experiences of walking into the White House. The first time was walking into the White House for the first Black president. And so there is a sense of pride that you have when you walk into the White House as a young person to work for the first Black president. And so that's what I felt. I felt a sense of pride. I also felt that first time being an immigrant, growing up in an immigrant household, being Black, being queer, being able to step into a campus where, most people would have said statistically I would never be able to be in the White House and work at the White House, was also very overwhelming and incredibly special. Fast forward to the second time, I had to do that. I got to do that in the White House Press Corps. I was a White House press team, for Biden and Harris administration. And that was a little different. I wasn't the press secretary yet, but we were coming out of an administration that had done so much, from an administration passed over from an administration that had done so much harm, and really attacked the institution of what the administration, what the White House, the federal government was supposed to be. So we had a lot of work to do. And so we had to get to work. It was COVID. And so it was very unprecedented. And so we were very much laser focused on the work at hand. And so very two different experiences, but all connected, obviously.
Valerie?
So the very first time I walked into the White House was after President Obama was elected. I had the privilege of co-chairing his transition. And President Bush was extraordinarily generous in terms of helping us get up to speed. Sounds kind of quaint now, but I mean, he really did everything he could and made all of his senior team available to us both in the cabinet and in the White House. And so the person who was helping me in the transition ultimately became my chief of staff. And so we made an appointment to go into the White House, and you go through the security. And I have to tell you, if anybody tells you they're not nervous the first time they go through security, you're thinking about, did I pay all those parking tickets? Like, am I good here? So we both get through security and we're like, phew. So it is December, and at dusk, the White House is lit. And it's such a beautiful white color. And it's dusk and we're walking up, and as Abby knows, and Karine certainly both know well, to the right side is what's called Pebble Beach, and it's where all the reporters hang out. And if you see those iconic photos of people from the White House standing with the White House in the background, they're doing it from the right-hand side of the White House.
It's real, by the way, which a lot of people ask me if it's a green screen. That is really the White House behind people.
Yeah. Yes, definitely, it's the White House. And believe me, the first time I went up there to talk to the press, I made the mistake of looking behind me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm standing here in front of the White House. But anyway, I digress. So this day, Michael and I are walking up the path, and we are nervous, and we're anticipating what's going to happen, and we are exhausted from the campaign, and we can't believe that somebody that we'd both known for, at that point, 17 years for me and maybe 21, 22 for Michael, is going to be the President of the United States. And just as we're coming up the curve, one of the cameramen who was packing up said, "Hey, welcome to the White House." And we stood there and burst into tears. Oh. Both of us were just crying, and I'm sure the cameraman had no idea he was going to get that kind of a response. But it was just so overwhelming. And then on actual inauguration day, I walked in. I don't like the cold. I'm from Chicago, but I do not like the cold. So I skipped the parade and ducked in to find my office. And I'm walking around, and I can't believe, like, I can walk around anywhere I want to in the People's House. And it was overwhelming. For those of you who remember, the economy was in a free fall. The big banks were on the verge of collapse. Millions of people were losing their jobs and their homes. And President Obama was like, stay focused. You know, we are here to do the people's work and ignore the noise. And I will say, there were periodic times while we were there where I would walk in and he could, because he knew me so well, he could take one look at me and he'd like, have you been looking at cable news? And I'd say, yes, I did look at Morning Joe this morning. He's like, stop looking, just focus on our work. And if you do that well, the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah.
Amazing.
You know, Valerie, I'm going to stick with you for a second because as I mentioned at the beginning, you've had this journey through all these different types of careers. And
Because I'm old, Abby.
No,
I could be their parents,
but
moms.
I
which
actually
is
think this is what I really
overwhelming.
want to get at for the people in the audience who, I bet some of you can't fathom, right? Like you're working for the mayor one day, and then the next day you're running a company, and then the next day you're in the White House and running the Office of Public Engagement, and there are years between that. But on that journey, how did you know when it was right to move from one thing to the next? And I will just
Good
want to
question.
recall what you said last night when you were talking about your dear mother, who I got to know a little bit and who's amazing. And she said, you know, don't you think you need to give up on this Barack Obama guy by now? At what point did you know, actually, I'm going to stick with this?
Well, it's interesting. During, well, to answer your question initially, you heard last night I was miserable and I had a child and I wanted her to be proud of me. That's why I left the private sector to begin with. And from then on, it was really opportunistic. I never went looking for jobs. They kind of came my way. And I always say to people, do the job you have as well as you can. And don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, but you know, good things will happen. And so when we were on the campaign trail, I had just become CEO not that long ago. And I had imagined, well, after he wins, I'll just go back to my normal life. And one day near the end of the campaign, we were flying somewhere and we were sitting in the plane together. And he said, it was like September, and he says, you know, if we pull this thing off, I'm gonna want you to go with me. And I was like, I'm good, I have a job and whatever. And then for a minute, I thought about throwing my hat in the ring to be his successor in the Senate. And he's like, I know the Senate and I know you, and you're gonna be much happier with me in the White House. He reminds me of this frequently, what a mistake it would have been to take a different direction. And so I think, you know, as those decisions were made, they were opportunistic. And I can't tell you I thought 3 steps beyond. I never really have after that first 10-year plan crumbled. I just figure, you know, when good opportunities knock, have the courage to take these leaps of faith. And it may look somewhat circuitous at the time, but when I look back, it makes really good sense. I mean, every move I've made was a building block preparing me for what I'm doing right now. And I would say that each step along the way.
Yeah. Karine, do you have some thoughts on this? Because, you know, politics is, in a way, taking leaps of faith after leaps of faith from candidate to candidate to candidate. And you've made some of those choices. The last one that you made landed you in the White House. But how did you navigate that?
I think you're exactly right. It is leaps of faith. And I always tell young people who ask me, how did you end up in the White House? What did you do? And I tell them, I just went with what I was passionate about. I focused on what I believed in. And those are the leaps of faith. I mean, I never thought that I would be in politics because when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a doctor. That's what my parents wanted me to be.
Me too. I think this is an immigrant
Me too.
family.
Right? They all, it's like, I'm sure many of you understand that. My parents wanted to be doctor, lawyer, engineer. Those are the things that they believed would get you into the middle class, right? Would be able to provide a good life for yourself. And so that's what my parents wanted. But then I went through the process and I realized that's not what I wanted to do. And I was pretty lost after college. I truly didn't know what it is that I was going to do. And I made a promise to my family, to my parents, that I was definitely going to go back to school, get another degree, but I didn't know what it was going to be. So I really tested myself and trusted myself for the first time in my entire life at that point, and worked for a couple of not-for-profits. I met some great mentors, and I went to get a master's at Columbia, and there my world truly opened up. And that's, when I was there, I got to meet former mayor David Dinkins, who was the first African-American mayor of New York City. There was this professor named Esther Fuchs, and they were both very much into politics, obviously, former mayor. And so they said, well, why don't you want to make change, you want to make a difference, why don't you do politics? You can, create policy or legislation. So I took that route. And as I was moving through city government, I wanted to go to DC, figure out what it looks like to work in the White House. So my dream just got bigger and bigger and bigger. My passion just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I took a chance. And it is true, like, you work on these campaigns, you don't know if the person's gonna win or not. Sometimes they lose, sometimes they win. And if they win, you move on with them to the next level. And it is truly, it's a chance that you're taking. But I tell young people, take that chance, especially while you're young, take it. And I have had an amazing experience, an amazing resume doing that. But my resume goes like this, because I've just taken chances. And so I don't regret any of it. I learned so much along the way, and every experience that I had helped me for the next thing that I was doing and helped me prepare and created relationships for myself. And so one of the reasons, I was able to do the Biden-Harris administration is because I got to know Valerie Jarrett, right? You get to know people, you get to meet them, and they get to be your mentors, and then you meet other people and they inspire you and they push you forward, and it's all connected.
Yeah. I want to spend a little bit of time now on mentorship, as you started with it. I think that's a big theme, obviously, for a lot of women as they're navigating their workplaces. And Valerie, when you were in the White House as a senior aide to the president, it wasn't just that you had that title. You also had President Obama's confidence because of just the length of your relationship. And some women had come to you at a certain point to share their experiences working in the White House. And it wasn't all that great. Tell us about that story, and tell us how it can happen that in a workplace that is led by someone that believes in women, believes in equity, can still be a place where people don't feel heard. And what do you do about it?
It's such a good question. And look, this is a president who was raised by a single mother. His grandmother worked at a time that many grandmothers were not working. He's married to an extraordinarily talented and successful wife, and he's got 2 daughters, so you gotta have him with hello. And I think one of the lessons that he learned is just because one person who's the leader has an attitude about the kind of culture they want to create, doesn't mean that it just happens automatically. And early on, because we were in this extraordinary crisis, I'll give the guys credit, that everybody was just challenged with this case of first impression. And we had some of the smartest people in the country working on these issues, but they didn't know what the answer was. They didn't know how much of a bailout we should provide to the banks. They didn't know whether we should save the automobile industry. We were really just using our best instincts. And let's face it, women, when men get anxious and nervous, it doesn't always bring out the best in them. When women get anxious and nervous, we calm down and we focus on the problem, right?
Yep.
But the other thing I would add to it is that I was the only woman in the senior staff, even though half of our senior staff were women. I was the only one who had this pre-existing relationship with the president. And so what I would observe is that when we were in meetings with the president, everybody's on their best behavior and everybody's voice is heard, and he had an uncanny way of figuring out who disagreed or who wanted to say something, and he would call on you just like in class when he was a law professor. And so everybody participated, but when he wasn't in the room, some of the senior men were outspoken and bombastic, and I bet you all have been in a meeting where you say something that you think is pretty smart, and nobody responds to it. 10 minutes later, some guy says the same darn thing.
Yep.
And things like that would happen, or you just get talked over in a meeting. And so I started observing this culture that I knew wasn't what the president wanted. And the accelerant was a woman who we really needed. Came to me and she said, they're just not listening to me. And I'm gonna quit. I'm like, oh, you can't quit. First of all, we need your brain, but second of all, you just can't do that right now. It was like 6 months in. So I went to the president and I said, let me just tell you what I'm observing. And he alluded to this in the video last night. I said, I think that the women's voices are shrinking. And he goes, well, I haven't seen that when we're all in a room together. I'm like, come on, they're on their best behavior around you. But the guys are not doing that well. And women come to the table with our experience, just like men do. And if you're used to getting shut out, and if you're used to your voice not being heard, and then you're in this environment where you really don't know the president, your boss, you tend to respond in a way that might be different if you actually knew him and what he expected. So I go to him and I tell him this. He says, we're having a dinner, and I'm inviting all the senior women. There are like 16 of us. So I go back and I talk to every woman individually. And I said, look, I know that there's a problem. I'm in those meetings that he's not in. He's invited us to dinner. You have to tell him the truth. And I know you're going to be tempted to go, oh, Mr. President, everything's fine, because that's what we do. Right. And I said, if you do that, I'm going to look stupid, and I don't like to look stupid. So do it for me. So we have this dinner. He goes around the room. He listens to everybody. And it was the same day that there had been a mass murder at Fort Hood, and he'd spent all day down in the Situation Room. Some of the women didn't even think he'd show up. He does. And this is important for all of you. You don't have to live in the White House or work in the White House, because we really did live there, to appreciate this. At the end of listening to everybody, and they repeated what their experiences were, he said, look, this is the White House. Decisions I make affect hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. This is some serious stuff, and we were in the middle of a big challenge. I need your brains. Each and every one of you was handpicked to be in your chair, and if you're not participating, then I'm not going to make the smartest decision. So I need you to go in there and fight for your ideas, not for your ego, but do it for me. So I will make a better decision. Well, what an empowering thing for the President of the United States to say. And he said, look, if we don't get this right, come back, tell Valerie we'll have another dinner, and we'll all come back and we're going to solve this problem. So no doubt he went and he fussed at the guys. But I would surmise. But that's not the important part. We, the women, started having dinner on our own. And what happens? You start to tell each other your stories. You learn about your families, your upbringing, your hopes, your dreams. We talked about the guys. And we became friends. And when you walk into a meeting, and the point here is there's really safety in numbers. When you walk into a meeting and you're feeling a little nervous, and even though the president has said, I want you to speak up, you know the guys and you know what you've been up against, but you see somebody who you just had dinner with the night before, and they are giving you that reassuring nod, it gives you courage. And so part of what I encourage women to do is make friends with each other, because that bond that you find, and we talked about this last night, the safety that you feel in this room is what you need to try to create in your workplace. Yeah. And you are a buyer when you're interviewing for a job. Make sure that the person who's hiring you shares your values and is going to let you show up and be your full self. And that's how President Obama felt. But you also have to reinforce this culture. And so I will say at the end of his first term, a reporter asked him, how would he compare the White House when he first became president to the end of the first term? And he said, at the end of when I first got there, I had the absolute best players on the field. At the end of the first term, I had the best team. And teams are all about trust.
So many lessons there for many of you who I know are senior leaders in your organizations. I want to ask Karine about this, because you talked about Valerie as a mentor to you and what that looked like for you. My observation is that a lot of people are going about being a mentee wrong, okay?
Oh.
And I want to get your take on how can you be mentored better? How can you find your mentor? And how can you nurture that relationship without becoming a burden to someone who is probably really busy, right?
Yes.
Because you do want a mentor who is booked and busy and is doing things out in the world. You want that person to be your mentor. But how do you engage with them in a way that is mutually beneficial?
So that's such a good question. So in my second round of going to the White House, I became the mentor, right? I became the one where a lot of young women of color, young black women, would reach out. And what was interesting about that is they were scared to reach out, actually.
Yeah.
I would say, sometimes I would call them into my office or see them and like, you should come talk to me. And and I would say, how are you doing? And they would be like, I'm okay, you know, and I said, come talk to me. And they'd say, you're so busy, I don't want to bother you. And I said, well, I can't help you or know how you're doing if you don't actually come see me. And so I would, you know, I would tell my assistant, make sure and I would reach out to them. I would say, reach out to this person, that person, let's find 10 minutes so that they can come into my office. And so that was the thing that I was finding, that they were very shy, gun shy, and I get it. I was the White House press secretary, so they felt that I had no space in my calendar for them, but I wanted them to know that I was here, or else what's the point of me being a historic figure in the role and not helping anyone else? That's the way that I felt. But to your point, I think one of the things that I realized is, as I was having conversations with them, you know, I would say, look, we have 10, 15 minutes, I'll make more time, but when you come if we had an initial conversation and I didn't quite know what they really wanted or how to help them, I said, look, I need you, when you come next time, do a little research, really dig in on what it is that you want to do next, and tell me, how can I be helpful to you? Is there someone that I can introduce you to? What are the 3 things that I can do? Because what I would tell them is, I'm giving you the time, but sometimes my brain is on 3 million things. I need you to guide me on how I can help you. Mm-hmm. And so those were one of the things, is making sure that they were active and you know, and really creative and thought about, you know, here, Karine, I don't want to waste your time. I know that we talked about this last time. Here are the 3 things. Here's what I would love if you are able to be helpful in. And so that was the thing that I was always trying to pull out of them. How do you really, how can I help you in a way that I'm not even thinking about? Because I can't read your mind, right? Just because you're in this role, it's not up to me to say that you should do this next. And so that was the way that worked. But I do want to touch on something really quickly. So we ended in the administration on January 20th, and on January 21st, I put out an op-ed that was published by Vanity Fair. And the op-ed that I put out was about my time as White House press secretary in the 2.5 years that I served. And the reason that I waited till the end is because I did not feel empowered or safe to talk about what was going on in my life while I was the White House press secretary. And the reason why is I do feel that when you are a first in the role, whatever role, you are not given grace. And you're not given protection. And you have to be better than everybody else. You have to work harder than everyone else. And so I wrote this op-ed, and it's about women in the workforce, primarily, and what we have to go through, especially as a Black woman. And it was important to tell my truth from my experience. It was important for people to hear my side of things, because for those 2.5 years, everybody was talking for me. And when you are in this role, and I think Valerie understands this as well, you can't be the story. You can't. It can't be about you. And so I wanted to have the last word. So I talked about it. I also talked about it from a very personal space. I talked about my mom during that time who was diagnosed with cancer. Nobody knew. Not my assistant, nobody on my team knew. And I was dealing with it on my own with my siblings. The president knew because I had to tell him, because I would have to disappear and go take care of my mom from time to time. But there are things that we have to do, and we have to be superhuman. And we have to do it in the face of people stabbing us in the back, stabbing us in the front, and we have to stand up prouder and bolder than anyone else. And so I wrote that op-ed so that women could feel seen. Yes, I was telling my truth, but I wanted women to feel seen. Even as the White House press secretary, I was dealing with a bunch of things, a bunch of real life-changing matters and issues that nobody knew. I had to keep it hidden. And so that is why I wrote that. But it is very much about women in the workforce. How do you manage? How do you maneuver? And being a first.
Yeah. We're going to take questions. I just want to remind you in a few minutes. I have so many more questions for the two of you. But Valerie, the title of this talk is Politics Not as Usual, partly because the backdrop of our conversation is a world in which women like us are walking into rooms automatically suspect. People just looking at us and saying, well, she didn't deserve to be there. And it's happening not just in the places you would expect, but also in the places that profess to not be doing that very thing.
Yes.
And you've been in those places. This is not a new thing, by the way, okay? That's a preface. But as you've navigated all the different spaces that you've been in, what's some advice for how to manage that, the reality of that, the psychology of that, and what that does to women?
Well, it's interesting. While I was listening to Karine, that made me really sad that you felt you couldn't be you in the White House. And part of my advice is that pick places where you are going to be included and welcomed. And I think a lot of us are always so busy trying to sell ourselves that we forget what I said a few minutes ago, which is that you're buyers too. And maybe the best example for this for me was interviewing Michelle Robinson for a job. And she made it clear within like the first few minutes that she was interviewing me as much as I was interviewing her, maybe more so. But what I remember about it, and this gets to kind of what Karine was talking about, is that, and this is now 33 years ago, I remember what she had on.
Wow.
I remember how she shook my hand. I remember how she saw her resume sitting on the desk and never told me anything about Princeton undergrad or Harvard Law School or Sidley Austin. She told me her story. And she was very open, not only about, which you guys now know is kind of a quintessential American story of this black woman growing up, parents didn't go to college, valued education, promoted she and her brother, supported them unconditionally, and asked them that they be excellent, to work hard, to give back and be a part of something bigger than themselves. And that was it. And then they said, go forth. And so she said, so I'm trying to figure out if this is a place where, with the skill set I have, I can thrive. And then she told me that her father and her best friend had died in the prior year. Because I said to her, why now? And I told her about having this baby and wanting to make her proud. And she tells me about these deaths in her family. By the time we finished this interview, I would have done anything for her. And it's because she opened up and she was willing to be vulnerable and she was willing to take the chance that I might not respond well to it. And as I've gotten to know her after all these years, you realize she is who she is. And she's so confident in her own skin. And that was when she was 27, so you know what she is now. Confident enough to do exactly what she wants to do and not do what she doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
And there's a lesson.
I'm not going too much further down that
Yeah,
path.
well, there's a great lesson of mentorship in that too. The vulnerability that it takes to tell your story to someone and let the relationship unfold from there.
Well, this is the thing. The worst thing that you can do is walk up to somebody after you've heard them speak, hint, hint, and say, will you be my mentor? Because what I say to people when they do that is, I do not even know you.
Right.
Go find somebody who knows you.
Yes.
And go find somebody who you have proven your good work. So I'm sitting here listening to Karine, and what she left out of our relationship is how hard I saw her work, how excellent her work was, how she didn't ask for anything. She just kept her head down and did her work. And during the time in the White House, maybe once or twice she reached out to me. Yeah. But I regularly was like, girl, I see what's happening. Are you okay? Do you need to go somewhere and just scream? I mean, I'm here for you. And it's because I developed a relationship with her at a time when neither one of us was really asking each other for anything. And so I encourage people to look at the mentor-mentee relationship as a relationship. Yes. Just as you would with your personal relationships, you have to invest, you have to be open, you have to be vulnerable, and you have to earn it. And so don't start asking of people who are busy until you actually have that relationship with them, and put up your hand to do extra work. I always remember when I'm drowning, like who says, who's there later than I am, right? Who do I walk out of the door and I see their light is still on? I pay attention to that.
I always say, make yourself useful
You
first.
be useful
Make
first.
yourself useful first. I do want to go to questions. The microphones, I believe, are on the floor, so if you have them, please come on up. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going for a second here. We can start the question clock, but I'll keep going for these last few minutes. All three of us are girl moms.
Yes.
We each have little girls, big girls, at different stages of life. And motherhood in these kinds of environments is really challenging. Karine, you just came out of this. Salil is like, what, 10?
So like she's 10
and
amazing,
which
and
is
about
like
to go
an
to middle school, which is crazy.
It's a scary age for a mom.
Scary age.
But she's also watched you go through this very publicly. What do you tell her about what you're experiencing?
So she has had, I think, a wild experience from the moment she was born, I would say, when it comes to her moms and what they do in their life and their career. And it was never normal, right? There was never anything normal, whatever the definition of normal is. And what I was able to do is she came to the White House a lot. And that was the beauty. We were able to bring our kids, and so she got to know my team. She got to know other people in the White House. And I think what it did is it made her realize how important the job is, how important the White House is. And so, but at the same time, I wanted her to feel grounded, right? And so it was definitely a little bit of make sure you treat people kindly, make sure you, make sure you fight for others. There was some of that I would tell her all the time. Listen to your teachers. There were the things that she would hear over and over in her life that helped her stay grounded, but understood and understand what the importance of where I worked and what we were trying to do. And so it's just been amazing watching her kind of move through life as I have been moving through life, and what she has picked up and how she internalizes it. I remember in December, I said to her, I said, look, I'm not gonna be at the White House anymore, and I'll be home a lot more and all the things, and so you won't be able to come to the White House. And I was surprised. She was really sad about it. And she had to take it in and internalize it. And then, like the first or second week of January, she comes to me, she's like, Mama, I want to go to the White House one last time because I want to say goodbye to my friends.
Oh,
That's so sweet.
And so it's just been it's going to be, I think, more interesting when she's 16, when she's 18, when she's 21, to really, when she's fully thought through it and ask me questions, and I tell her stories, what she felt about my moment at the White House.
all right. Well, we have some questions. I just want to say one thing about Laura, who is Valerie's amazing daughter and is a good friend of mine. She's an amazing woman. So
Thank you.
Done a
congratulations.
phenomenal job.
You did a
Thank
great
you.
job.
Yeah.
The most important job you'll ever have.
Right?
You did a
Very
great
good.
job. So let me go to the quick question here. I want to give you guys some time. Go ahead.
Hi.
First of all, before you speak, apologies, please tell us your name and please keep your question brief.
Yes, Draytana Maddox. And so I just want to know what type of, or can you provide some insight into what type of black girl magic you have to endure. I watch CNN every day. My husband wants me to stop because I'm beating the air, especially on your show, Abby. There's somebody I want to fight, right, every time I watch. And so I'm just wondering, like, your face and your poise, like, all of the things, like, how are you guys doing it? Like, what is the internal dialogue that you have to be able to endure? Because we out here fighting in these streets, and I just want to know, like, how are you doing it? Like, share, give me some light.
I don't know, I guess this is a question for me. Here's what I will say, and y'all can chime in. Look, my philosophy from the very beginning of my career, I always was almost always the only black girl in any workplace that I've been in. And the thing I never wanted to do was give them the satisfaction of my anger. And at the end of the day, I'm gonna bring facts to the table. I'm gonna bring logic to the table. I'm gonna bring compassion to the table. Because sometimes in politics, what's missing is just humanity and a sense of shame actually, that can go a long way. And I don't have to raise my voice to do that. I don't have to belittle people to do that. But, you know, in the role that I'm doing, I think people they always want to up the ante. And I think it's very disarming to people when I don't match their level of energy. And it really forces them to kind of like, oh, she's not gonna go there with me? The answer is no, I'm not. And you still are gonna have to answer my question at the end of the day. So that's how I approach it, and that's why I do it that way. So.
Well, you also have to remember, look, it's not about you in any of our positions. It's about you being there to help people understand what's happening, the facts, or to help people who are less fortunate than yourself. And if it gets to the point where it's for you, about you, then I think it's more likely to hurt you. But if you know that you are there, it is such a noble cause, public service, or being in the press, particularly when things are tough.
Yeah.
And you just have to dig deep. And I did a lot of talking to myself, and I would say, I'm going to go out there no matter what they say to me, no matter how much they try to provoke me, no matter how much I am underestimated, as we are always underestimated. And that happened to me in the White House. There were people who thought, well, you're just their friend, just their friend. I had a very serious career before I became their friend and after, but you just have to kind of have the internal fortitude to just keep doing your job. And being underestimated actually is to your advantage. And there were a lot of those men I referred to early on who did not make it the full 8 years, like none of them made it the full 8 years. And I will close by saying there is just no better revenge than success.
I agree. Can I just add really quickly?
Yeah.
And I totally agree. Look, I was the longest serving female White House press secretary. There's a reason why, right? Because I stayed focused, and Joe Biden gave me the job for a reason. Because he liked how I represented him. He believed that I had the credentials to do that. And so that's what I remembered every single day. And I agree, it's never let them see you sweat. It's bring humanity, compassion to the job. And that's what gets you through it. And exactly, they underestimate us. And anytime you show up, you prove them wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what I kept on doing every day, day in and day out. And some people would say to me, man, you really look like you were gonna tell that person off. and I knew I would never, because I couldn't allow that to happen. And also, I'm not representing myself. I'm representing the most powerful person in the world, the leader of the free world. And I know how he is. So that's what I was trying to mirror. So it was never about me, but I understood that people would make it about me.
But they do bring you to the brink sometimes. They do.
They do bring you close.
They bring you so close.
One last quick thing on this, just because I think, again, it's important for the women in the audience to hear. You are a role model. And when you are a role model, you have to remember the children are watching. And again, when you are first, and in our positions we were, you know that there is an extra responsibility to show up well. And you know, you hear your mom in the back of your head and your grandmother telling you how to behave and how to treat people decently, and to not let them see you sweat, because there's so many people around the country who are looking at you, and you're setting the tone.
And they're rooting for you.
Many are, some are not.
They may not, but they may not be in the room.
More people, you know, I think that the loudest voices, the detractors, can be sometimes the loudest voices and not representative
That's what,
of how people feel. So I think to
agree.
keep that in mind. I want to go quickly to another question. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. My name is Virginia LaFontant. I have a speakers agency, so I help C-suite executives secure speaking opportunities to build their thought leadership. And my question is, there's a lot of conversation regarding how do we get a seat at the table, but I believe the first question should be, how do we actually get in the room? So what tactical or methods or strategies or just any advice that you can give us on how to get into those rooms and make those high-level connections and conversations?
Relationships. Somebody has to invite you in the room. You really can't bogart your way into most rooms. Somebody's got to see something in you and bring you along. And it's helpful if it's somebody who's going to let you shine in that room. And I was fortunate when I worked in the mayor, not even the mayor's office, in the law department for the city of Chicago, I had a mentor who was a black woman. And she invited me to meetings that I would not have been invited to but for her. And then she stepped back and let me shine.
Wow.
And I always remember that. And in the 8 years I worked for President Obama, I cannot think of a time I made a presentation to him. I always let my team do it. He had heard me talk long enough.
Yeah.
And so you need people to invite you in the room that let you shine.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So when I was in the Obama-Biden administration, even though I was working for on the President Obama side, I got to travel a lot with the Vice President Joe Biden, and I developed a relationship with him, and he got to know me, and I was, pretty young, and he kind of kept an eye on me and watched me throughout my career. And the only reason I became the White House press secretary is because he wanted me in that role. That's the only reason, because he believed in me and he watched me grow and he thought, yeah, that is the person that I wanted. And yeah, picked me and allowed me to shine on my own. And it is definitely, I agree, it's relationship. If I did not have that relationship, I mean, the White House press secretary role is such a personal pick that the president has. And so they are deciding who is going to be the person who is my voice and the face of the administration. And it was a relationship that started in 2009 and that continued through the early 2020s.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all so much. This was a great conversation. We could have gone on
I
and
know.
on. Valerie Jarrett, Karine Jean-Pierre, thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.